Well, thank you very much for the opportunity to join you all this morning and speak to such a distinguished group of business leaders and luminaries. I very much enjoyed the panelist discussion so far. As someone who grew up on a cattle ranch in the Texas Panhandle and having served energy companies for over 20 years now, in many ways, I've been surrounded by the energy sector my entire life. As a kid, I would routinely ride my bicycle past multiple oil and gas wells operating on my family's farm. And I remember vividly riding in the car with my parents in the evenings and looking out into the window at the lights of the drilling rigs dotting the Texas night. I was back home a few weeks ago for a visit, and when I looked out onto the horizon, I saw a powerful visual of the energy transition that is happening right before our eyes. Dozens of wind turbines dotted the landscape next to the wells. And as a native Texan, I am proud to see Texas leading the energy transition. As many of you all know, Texas generates more than twice the wind power than any other state. The energy transition underway makes this one of the most exciting times for us in this sector, as oil and gas, power and utility companies, and energy stakeholders across the value chain design a path towards decarbonization. The IEA estimates that if all announced climate commitments made by governments around the world were met on time, CO2 emissions from energy and industrial processes would drop about 50% by 2050 compared to 2019. But to accurately benchmark the progress, we are seeing a move towards a shared baseline of standards and requirements. And one of the most recent developments being the SEC's proposed rules on climate disclosure. As these reporting and requirements mature, it's very important to remember that climate disclosures are not just about compliance, but also about organizations having the data and insights needed to effectively execute their strategy to reduce carbon footprints. The challenge now is how to make the energy transition while still supplying energy that meets the needs of today and tomorrow. And one of those challenges we face is inflation. It's very difficult to discuss meeting the energy needs of today without addressing energy's role in inflation. Overall, the current energy price environment is unprecedented and a result of the confluence of significantly increased demand and restricted supply. Over year-on-year headline CPI edged down from March to April as the surge in energy prices cooled substantially, and the April CPI report showed firming price pressures in pandemic-related services like airline fares. And last summer, airline fares and rental car prices, as you all know, have surged as the economy reopened and the demand for leisure services far outpaced the supply of flights and cars. I would expect another, albeit maybe smaller, jump in pandemic-affected services inflation this summer. But the bottom line is energy prices will continue to have a strong effect on inflationary pressures in the short term. And long term, these pressures may also accelerate the energy transition. Another challenge that we have is keeping in lockstep with the advancement of the technology as we move through the transition. And in many ways, discussion on decarbonization and energy sources have moved ahead of technology and our ability to supply the energy demand needed to power the planet today. One example of this anticipated transition underway is from the internal combustible engines, or ICE, to EVs. By the end of the decade, EV costs are expected to approach parity with internal combustible powered vehicles, but even now there's a wide disagreement on when the mass EV market will materialize. And as the need for fuel for ICE vehicles may be with us for a longer time than many expect, as efforts are underway to build out that EV infrastructure. Depending on the analyst that you follow, EVs could capture up to 37% of the global market by 2030, or as little as 24%. And in terms of adoption rates, to drive mass adoption of battery EVs in the US, additional investments will be needed to be made in the fast chargers. Business leaders in our KPMG annual Global Auto Executive Survey believe that the vast majority of consumers would only be willing to wait 30 minutes or less to charge their car when they are traveling. And as an EV owner since 2015, I can attest to that number as well. At KPMG, our view is that the mobility landscape of the future may likely be a mosaic, really, of several different types of automobiles: ICE, electric, natural gas, hydrogen powered, along with hybrids or even solar. So therefore, I think it's really imperative that our investments in areas like modernization of the grid keep pace with the transition, but also have the flexibility to accommodate the mosaic of solutions. In the face of the energy transition, one thing we can't lose sight of, though, is the people and the jobs in the industry. The energy sector is already responsible, as many of you all know, for the millions of jobs created across the country and around the world. And these are high-paying jobs that we don't want people to lose. So in this red-hot labor market, finding workers to lead the energy transition will continue to be a challenge. I think this presents an opportunity, though, for the energy sector to lead in upskilling and training their existing workforce. And based on climate pledges by governments globally, the IEA estimates that almost 15 million jobs will be created by the energy sector by 2030, with 10 million of those in areas of modernization of infrastructure and reliant technologies. So this is a fantastic opportunity, in my opinion, for energy companies to attract new talent who may not have otherwise ever thought about working in the sector, and ones who are excited to work towards a lower carbon future. And it's also an opportunity with partnerships with universities, trade schools, and local grassroots efforts to develop the skills required for the future. But as we move towards the energy transition, it's really critical that we have a balanced energy landscape. In thinking about the bridge we are building to the future, it's important that we think about this. I always say there's 4 key pillars, and a few of these the previous panelists have mentioned in some form: sustainability, availability, reliability, and affordability into our energy system. And until recently, most Americans have viewed availability and reliability and probably affordability as somewhat givens. Obviously, current events have challenged that paradigm, and the focus on energy availability and affordability should continue to increase. And having a diversified energy supply and mix of sources is so critical, so that economies don't become over-reliant on a single or limited sources of supply. And one of the keys to this, and something I want to appeal to this group to do, is to ensure that all stakeholders, including investors, governments, regulatory bodies, consumers, and adjacent sectors like automotive and industrial manufacturing, are effectively engaged in contributing in their roles in the process. So as we focus on the path to net zero, I can't think of any other sector other than energy that is more equipped to lead the energy transition and engage with other industries. I may be biased, but energy companies already have the experience developing advanced technologies. They're equipped to build and operate complex engineering projects, and they have experience working all over the world, in even the remote parts of our planet. And we are already seeing collaboration, fortunately, and many partnerships between energy and tech companies, energy and automotive companies, and others. So that's extremely positive. And as The recent volatility shows energy companies are proven to be incredibly resilient, and they can pivot where they need to. As companies chart innovative and very different paths towards decarbonization, the iteration, research, development, resilience will all continue to be key. But again, I can't think of any other sector better prepared to do that than energy. So if you're a governmental agency, engage them as a partner versus an adversary. And if you're here today representing an energy company, lean in, I would say, and lead from the front, because we are on the cusp of a very exciting journey, and it's so critical. We are all in this together. Again, Sheila, thank you for the opportunity to share my thoughts today, and I believe we have some time for a few questions.
You certainly do, and I have a few for you. What do you think is the impact of the Russia-Ukraine war? Will it accelerate decarbonization discussions or cause economies to focus more on meeting their own supply needs today? And what do you see as a result of the disruption from the Russian-Ukrainian standpoint?
Yes, well, first of all, I know everyone's hearts go out to the people of Ukraine and the Russian citizens. It's such a humanitarian tragedy, what's going on. But I think certainly what we've seen, particularly in Europe, is it has accelerated that discussion around decarbonization as Europe thinks about how they move off of Russian supply, particularly of Russian gas. Here in the US, I think the conversation around affordability and availability, again, one of those four pillars, we've certainly seen that elevated. And that's a good thing, because I think we have to have a balanced discussion around all four of those pillars as we move towards the energy transition. So I have definitely seen, particularly in Europe, the acceleration of decarbonization, and even here in the US with the addition of the discussions around the other two pillars.
And what advice would you give institutional U.S. energy companies right now, given the state of the market and the incredible uncertainty geopolitically and otherwise?
Yeah, I think this all comes back to a big lesson that businesses have learned in recent years, which is resilience in the face of uncertainty is probably key. And one action can have a multiple ripple effect across supply chains and industries. I think the importance of operational and financial discipline is important for these energy companies to weather the commodity price fluctuations. And I also would say to the energy company, it's really important to get a good handle on how you assess and manage risk. So think about adding more robust scenario planning to your risk analysis, greater management around things like cyber, but really having a handle on enterprise risk management at the corporate level is important.
What should industry and government leaders actually be considering as they build this framework that's designed to accommodate all these changes in the energy markets and direction as the government changes, as the state, not just federal, state, local,
Yeah,
federal?
great question. And I that's an important one. And I mentioned a little bit in my comments how important it was for all the stakeholders to come together and engage in the process. So for governments, engaging with energy companies and seeing them as partners versus adversaries and vice versa. But they have a role to play in that path to net zero, and they do a credible job right now meeting our energy demands, and have proven over the last 100 years that they are innovative. For energy companies, you really have to lean in and lead from the front. You need a developed strategy. It has to be articulated, communicated to your investors, to the community, to shareholders, to your employees, and recognize that there are many paths on this journey. I don't think there's a single path that's proven to be the path. So it's okay to have multiple paths, but it's going to take all of us working together.
And speaking of multiples, how do you deal with the multiple layers of government, and not just multiple layers of government, but the continuous changes in government? whether it's at the national level, the state level, the regional level, it's the change element. Once you got it's like building a house. Once you got the plan for the house, you can build the house. But if the designer comes back every few months and decides, no, I don't want I don't want it to have the 4 windows in the front. I just want 3, and they've got to be in a diagonal. Yeah.
Yeah, having certainty is probably one of the most stable things you can have as an energy company. I had a CEO tell me one time, whatever the policy is, we can deal with. We just need the certainty to know how to plan. And these companies are dealing in a longer term, strategic 5-year plus outlook. So in order to have investment, you've got to have that level of certainty, and the change in agendas is challenging for companies to face. I think one of the ways to do that, it's hard, and it's the hand-to-hand combat around engagement between the multiple levels. And again, there's an opportunity for all of us if we come to the table with the mindset that we're working towards a common solution. We all want a clean, safe, healthy planet.
One last question. Looking into your crystal ball, what do you see as the evolving mood of the country as more of these continuous changes and impacts that impact income, impact availability of real buying power? What do you see as the mood of the country, and how does the mood of the country really drive what happens next? Because it's a mood. Sometimes it's not even statistics, it's a mood.
That's right. And one of the ways I think the energy transition has accelerated is because you had governments, you had investors, and you had the consumers all asking for a lower carbon type footprint. So having all 3 of those together. Now, as to the mood of what the public is going to be, I don't have the crystal ball, but I can tell you that affordability is a very important topic right now. And I think particularly for households that are trying to, provide for their families and maintain their, way of living, that affordability is going to be a key. And that's something that was missing, frankly, a little bit from the conversation before around decarbonization. So I think we need to have that discussion around the cost. But there's also a new generation of consumers that are coming up the chain. And I know I have a teenage daughter, and she's willing to pay more for greener type products, services than maybe her grandmother is willing to pay. So I think that's also driving a lot of the conversation.
Well, thank you so much, Angie. It was a real pleasure talking to you today. Great insights, and we look forward to seeing and talking to you more.
Thank you, Sheila. Take care.